What's happening, guys? My name is Anthony, and in today's video I'm going to be giving you guys some quick tips to driving without assist. So this video is going to be a basic one where I just give you guys some basic tips on how to turn off the assist, what to do in order to turn off the assist and still be able to drive the car without flying off of the track. However, I will be going into more detail into each individual assist later on down the line and making videos on how to be quick without those assists. So if you do enjoy this video, you do learn something from this video, make sure to share it around and make sure to hit that like button at any given point of the video. And let's get straight into these basic tips. So for the first assist, I'm going to cover arguably the hardest assist for people to turn off, and that is the racing line. I'm sure a lot of you guys have even been able to get to the point where you can drive without all the other assists, but yet you still have the racing line on, because turning off the racing line just seems to be very difficult. And once you get into that strategy of how to turn it off and you've actually done it and you commit to it, you realize that it's not as difficult as you may initially think, especially considering, you're thinking, oh wow, I've got to remember the braking points on 23 different tracks. So it's going to be very difficult to do. However, it's not really that difficult to do. So let's get into some of the tips. So the first tip I have for you guys to taking off the racing line is to record a lap with the racing line on and then watch that replay back. And after you've watched the replay back, just take a look at some of the heavier braking zones and just see if there's anything around about where the red line starts indicating that you need to brake. Just take a look around the track and see if there's anything that sticks out to you, and you can always use that as your reference point once you've taken the racing line off. So we all know that the racing line isn't necessarily the quickest way around the track, and that's why we have to use the racing line as more of a braking reference than how to drive the car. So when it comes to all of this is why I say to record a lap and then just take a look around and see exactly if there's anything else that stands out to you guys that you can use, so that when you take the racing line off, you don't have to depend on the racing line itself. Also, another way to figure out where you should brake is to simply just watch hot laps and track guides, which I'll leave a link in the description to my track guides if you want to go and check that out. And once you've got yourself some reference points, I highly suggest going into time trial and driving at around about half speed or maybe 60% just to get a feel for the track and get a feel for how the corners intertwine with each other and build that muscle memory. Because even if you do have those reference points, you don't have that muscle memory, which means you're still going to make quite a lot of mistakes at first as soon as you turn the racing line off. So remember, guys, that when it comes to taking off assists, the main thing you want to think about is building that muscle memory, because the more that you think about what you have to do, the slower you're going to be. And that is why whenever you take the racing line off, whenever you take traction control off, you're going to be slower than when you had the assist on, because you actually have to think about what you're doing, and the time that it takes your brain to process that, you're going to end up being slower than when you didn't have to process it. So as you build up muscle memory through just playing the game and putting in those laps, you'll realize that you're starting to become quicker and quicker because those things become second nature to you. And the final tip that I have for you guys is to always look a step ahead of yourself, and that is just so that you have more time to react to things that may happen. So once you're going towards a braking zone, you want to be looking at your braking point, and then just before you hit that braking point, you want to already be looking towards the apex of the corner, and then as you're getting closer towards the apex, you want to start looking out towards the exit route. And as I said before, what it does is it just gives you more time to be able to react to things. The less time that you have to react to things, the more trouble you're going to be when you make a mistake or when something comes rushing in front of you. Now we're moving on to traction control, and I know a lot of people, as soon as they take off traction control, they end up spinning the car a bunch of times and be like, nope, not dealing with this, let's just put traction control back on. And the reason for that is because you're not being smooth with the throttle. You have to remember that there's a lot of power coming from the engine of a Formula 1 car, and the tires just don't have enough grip to be able to handle that. So if you put too much wheel spin on the car, you're going to spin. So the main thing you have to do with traction control is simply just practice being smooth with the throttle, even if you're slower at first, and as time goes on, you'll learn how to be quick but smoother with the throttle, and this will be a huge benefit to you because you will be able to control the limit of the tires. And what traction control actually does is once you get to that limit, it sort of just cuts power to the engine so that you don't go over that limit, and that's what makes you slower out of slow speed corners compared to people who don't use traction control. And the next tip I have is to short shift out of slower speed corners. I say slower speed because I know that most of you guys, when it comes to traction control, it's not necessarily high speed corners that you have trouble with, it's those slower speed corners where you don't have as much downforce on the car and there's a lot more power going to the rear tires from the engine. If you short shift out of those slower speed corners, it means that there's not as much power coming into the tires, which means you're able to be a little bit more aggressive with the throttle, which overall allows you to be quicker coming out of those corners. And the final basic tip that I have for you guys when it comes to not using traction control is to use tracks that have slower speed corners so that you can actually practice the short shifting and practice being smoother on the throttle. So tracks like Monza or tracks like Austria, especially turn 3 at Austria, that's a corner that a lot of people struggle with. You want to be able to practice that in a race setting. So go in GP mode, go in an actual race setting and just practice being smoother on the throttle, practice learning how to short shift, and once again, just building that muscle memory. So I know that there are a lot more assists than the 3 that I'm going to be talking about in this video. However, for most of the other assists, it's fairly standard as to what you need to do in order to drive without those assists. For example, with F1 2019, there were actually 6 different ERS modes. So using the ERS assist was a lot more of a benefit to newer drivers than it is for F1 2021, where there's only 2 different ERS modes, which is medium and overtake. However, with some of the assists like racing line, traction control, and the next topic that I'm going to be talking about, ABS, there's a lot more that goes into it. And last but not least, we have ABS. And when people talk about ABS and driving without it, essentially what they mean is, how do I not lock up going into corners? And the best way to do that is to practice your trail braking technique, which, if you don't know what that is, it's the technique of going 100% on the brakes as you're going in towards the corner, and then as you turn in towards the apex of the corner, you want to trail off of the brakes. Now that is just the watered down basic version of what trail braking is. However, I will be going into a lot more detail about trail braking once I make my in-depth guide about how to drive without ABS. So if you do want to catch that video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn post notifications on so that you get notified when that video drops. And another basic tip that I have for you guys for turning ABS off is to start with a braking point in mind and then practice braking later and later until you either fly off the track or you realize that you didn't actually need to brake for that corner at all. And the final tip I have for turning off ABS is just to remember that lockups happen to even the best of us. Even people like Jana or me lock up from time to time. So what you want to work on is minimizing the amount of lockups that you have during a race. If you're locking up going into a certain corner, you might just have to brake a little bit sooner, bleed off of the brakes a little bit sooner, so you're not locking up going into the corners, because obviously locking up will cause more tire wear, which will make you slower and slower as the race goes on. So those were some basic tips for driving without assists on F1 2021. Make sure to stick around until the end card and you'll be able to choose one of the 2 track guides that I've already released. I will be releasing some more track guides over the next coming weeks as well. And make sure to hit the like button if you learned from this video. Make sure to smash the subscribe button, especially if you want to see more in-depth tutorials on some of the things that we touched on today. And I'll catch you guys in my next video.